I'm David Haynes, and welcome to the OnPolitics show at JS Online. I'm the opinions editor here. I'm joined in the studio this week by Mary Spicuzza, a reporter for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. We'll be joined by Patrick Marley from Madison from our bureau there, and by Craig Gilbert, our Washington bureau chief. We're going to talk politics this week. So, this week in politics, another gun bill hits the Capitol in Madison. We're going to talk about why voters seem so chronically frustrated. A win this week for open government, more fallout over Lincoln Hills School, and we'll take your reader questions. Patrick, I'd like to turn to you first. Another bill dropped this week from Mary Lozich, the Republican legislator from New Berlin, and it would allow people who have a concealed carry license to carry that gun basically right up to the school door. So talk about what the bill would do, what the thinking is behind it, the motivation, and maybe something about the timing too.
Sure. So this is a bill from Mary Lozich. She's the Senate president, along with Representative Rob Brooks from Saukville. And the concealed carry law was passed in 2011, but it bars people, even permit holders, from going onto school grounds or in schools with a gun. They say that they're concerned that parents who are concealed carry permit holders are coming onto school grounds to drop their kids off from school, pick them up, and that when they do that, they're inadvertently committing a felony. They say they've heard from some school officials, and they want to make sure that those people aren't violating the law. So their bill would change that so that permit holders can go onto any school grounds with a gun as long as they've got their license. And then into the schools would be determined by the local school board. So a school board could say that you can't come into the school or allow permit holders to come in.
So what is it why do you think that the bill dropped now? Is this at all related to President Obama's actions, executive actions on guns, do you think?
I don't know if that's a motivator. I mean, the difficulty with the timing is that it's the middle of January. The assembly leader in the Robin Voss has said he wants the session to be over by February. In any case, it's going to be done in March or maybe April. So it's late for a bill that needs a big push to get introduced. That said, Mary Lozich is the Senate president. She decides what committee this bill will go to. So she has an ability to sort of give this bill added momentum since she's got that position as president. I talked to Senator Lozich, I talked to Representative Brooks. Neither of them mentioned the president's talking on this issue.
Okay.
Rob Brooks says he's been working on it for more than a year, but it is late in the session to come out.
Right. And I wonder what kind of a reaction you're hearing. Mary, have you heard anything from City Hall? I know the mayor immediately came out against it, but what else have you heard?
Yeah, I think his exact words were, "This is insane." I think he said that the local officials here don't want guns in the classrooms, and they also don't want them on playgrounds. Because if it's on school grounds, presumably a school district couldn't actually decide the grounds. They would just be deciding the buildings. He really said that he doesn't think that this would make the city safer, and essentially that it's a terrible idea. He was, traveled to Obama's news conference or speech last week in D.C.
Right.
and has obviously been a vocal opponent of expanding concealed carry and other gun laws or gun rights bills. He also said that his concern and Chief Flynn's concern with concealed carry is that they haven't been able to create data or records tracking when concealed carry permit holders commit crimes. So that's
a matter of the law, right?
Correct. Right. Okay. So they feel frustrated that even if a lot of concealed carry permit holders were creating gun crimes, no one would know and there would be no data on it.
Yeah. What about from the general public? Patrick, have you been able to judge any of the reactions so far? I know we had a ton of comments on your story. Lots of people are reading it and talking about it. What are you hearing?
Well, I mean, anytime you're dealing with guns, you have this very stark split in public sentiment. Gun rights advocates feel strongly that they have a Second Amendment right to carry, particularly if they've got a license, should be able to do it anywhere. They don't like the idea of having a lot of spaces carved out. They say that just tells the bad guys where they can go. They're very concerned about situations like Sandy Hook, where they say, the school becomes a soft target. There's nobody there to defend it. People on the other side, like Mayor Barrett, just say that it makes things more dangerous, very concerned about a parent going into a parent-teacher conference if a school were to allow the guns in the schools, get upset, get frustrated. Schools are a place where a lot of emotions are very high. If you think about sporting events now, football games, soccer games, any outdoor sports, people could conceal carry too. So it's something that, as with all gun issues, you just have very strong feelings both ways.
But Senator Lozich said, didn't she, that she was actually asked to put the bill together by a superintendent in New Berlin?
Yeah, actually, it was the vice president of the school board, Tom David.
Okay, you got it.
He brought the idea to her. She also saw a lot of support from the superintendent of the Whitnall School District.
Okay.
So she's saying that the people in her district want this. They cite situations where parents have come onto school property with a gun inadvertently or not knowing the law, and they're very concerned that somebody's going to get charged with a crime for really having no ill will.
Right. And there seems to be, based on your story this morning, a real debate in the education community about whether this is a good idea or not. What have you heard from those who are opposed or concerned about it?
I mean, again, it just splits right along those same lines. You've got some school officials, I think if this law were to pass, you would have wildly different policies. I mean, all school grounds would be available to carry a gun if you have a license. But as for school buildings, I think you would see wildly different things. I would be very surprised if Milwaukee, for instance, were to allow anybody to bring guns into their schools. But I think in suburban districts, that would not be uncommon. I think up north, that would not be uncommon. And so, it would really be decided at the local level.
Yeah, and this gets to this whole argument about if enough good guys are armed, then when a bad guy shows up with a gun, the chances are, this is the argument that the gun rights people would make. Well, Patrick, thanks so much. Stand by. We're going to move now to our Washington Bureau and Craig Gilbert, where we're going to talk about divided government. Now let's turn to Craig Gilbert, the Journal Sentinel's Washington Bureau Chief. And Craig, you're returning to the topic of political polarization this week. What are you finding so far in your reporting?
Well, if you follow the coverage of President Obama's final State of the Union address, you might have read that the mood in the country is pretty negative right now about the direction of the country. Gallup and Pew both ask this question: are you generally satisfied or dissatisfied with the way things are going in the U.S.? And the dissatisfaction is running in the high 70s right now. But what's interesting about it is people have been dissatisfied for a long time. I mean, these numbers, these views have been very negative nationally since President Bush's second term. So we're talking about a 10-year trend, which is really unprecedented in this polling. And I'm sort of exploring the relationship between that trend and political polarization, which is a relatively recent phenomenon, divided government. I mean, those two things together are kind of a recipe for nobody really being very happy because nobody's really getting their way.
So, Craig, is that the main reason voters seem frustrated?
Well, there's certainly a lot of economic frustration and anxiety. There's sort of global uncertainties, external threats, but the role that polarization plays is to exacerbate a lot of this because it guarantees that whatever the economic conditions, the voters in the party that doesn't occupy the White House are going to be extremely negative about the conditions in the country. That draws these numbers down. It also guarantees that if we have divided government, there's almost no common ground and there's gridlock, and that's frustrating to people of all stripes. So it does play this role. I mean, one real kind of amazing number to me in the recent polling when Pew asked last year whether people thought that they were either on the winning side or the losing side of the big political issues today, a majority of Democratic voters said they were on the losing side, and an even bigger majority of Republican voters thought they were on the losing side.
Oh, that's really interesting, yeah.
If everybody thinks they're losing, then there's not going to be a lot of contentment and happiness about the way things are going.
Well, on that point, there's sort of the strange intersection between the concerns, in some ways, of Bernie Sanders supporters and some of the concerns of Donald Trump supporters on certain economic issues.
Yeah, and I think there's some commonality there, and there's also a common thread in the sense that because we have divided government, neither side is entirely happy. I mean, even under President Obama, Democrats, if you look at Democratic satisfaction with the way things are going in the country, it's much higher than Republicans, but it's still under 50%, which wasn't true when Bill Clinton was president. In fact, when Bill Clinton was president, both Republicans and Democrats were up above 50% during his second term. So we're just not going to see that in this day and age, but you have people in both parties that are frustrated by the inability of their party to get more done. In the case of Democrats, it's a Republican Congress that's limiting President Obama's agenda, and in the case of Republicans, obviously, it's having a Democrat in the White House,
Yeah.
and the inability of Republicans to undo what President Obama's doing, which helps account for the sour attitudes of Republican voters toward their own Congress.
Yeah. Could we turn to for a moment to this issue of rancor in politics, the way we're talking politics these days in the United States? Both President Obama in his State of the Union address and the response by Nikki Haley, the Republican governor of South Carolina, brought this up. Haley mentioned that she thought he should call her own party out, said that her party had some responsibility for that, which I found interesting. What do you make of the politics behind both Obama and Haley's comments?
Well, it says a lot when kind of a call for civility and moderation starts a fight. And that's essentially what happened with Governor Haley. I mean, her remarks were rightly taken as a criticism, a critique of Donald Trump. He fought back. A lot of people on talk radio pushed back. I mean, this is the world we're living in, where everything is kind of a cause for an argument. And even, whether the idea, which seems pretty unexceptional, that we should be respectful and somewhat tolerant in our political disagreements and the way we disagree, is taken as fighting words by some people. So that was a really interesting moment. There are clearly some Republicans, obviously, that are disconcerted by the Trump candidacy and in some cases are horrified by the idea that he could be the nominee. And so the Republican Party is trying to work through this, but it's a big dilemma because Republicans criticizing other Republicans is seen by some people in the party as just a boost to the other guys, to the Democrats, and kind of helping the enemy. So that complicates this internal debate that Republicans are having.
Well, something tells me, Craig, that we're not likely to see a huge boost in civility over the next, say, 10 months.
Not in Wisconsin and not elsewhere.
All right. Craig Gilbert, we'll have to leave it there. That's Craig Gilbert, our Washington Bureau Chief.
Thanks.
So, Mary Spicuzza, let me turn to you next. You were in Madison earlier this week to cover the Public Records Board, this obscure agency that has been much in the news recently, probably never expected to be much in the news. What's going on there now? Is this issue basically over? What can we expect next?
Yeah, we're going to start calling them the formerly obscure agency because now everybody knows all about them.
Were they all wearing paper bags over their heads?
Not quite. But so the Public Records Board on Monday rescinded this previous decision from August that really redefined transitory records. They were a bit prickly about our descriptions of them, that they had essentially broadened or expanded what's a transitory record to include things like email to set up meetings or visitors logs, although there's some debate over whether that's even a transitory record. But they basically backed away and just undid their action from August, which really drew a lot of controversy. We saw almost 1,900 letters from the public, written comments. Some people spoke at the meeting. I did not see anybody or hear from anybody in favor of the changes other than folks on the records board.
So is that part of the story done?
For now, although the chairman said that he still thinks that there are weaknesses in the previous or the existing definition of transitory records and that he thinks it needs to be revisited. He did not say when, and he did not give us any kind of timeline.
Well, has he said what those weaknesses are in his opinion?
So they were saying that part of the reason that they looked at this definition is that they felt the existing one, which was crafted in 2010, was vague and jargony and just said essentially that transitory records are records with temporary significance. And they were kind of saying, people who are doing trainings want to direct their staffers on what that means, and there isn't very clear language on what that means. So some of them said that they feel like there's more opportunity for somebody to kind of play with transitory records or dumping records under that existing definition that is now back in effect after they rescinded their decision.
More generally, where do you see the story going next?
I think that we are waiting on some records that we have asked for over a month ago, or about a month ago, about how this change came about, whose idea was it, was anybody lobbying for this on the sides or pressuring anybody from the records board or asking for these changes, and who was that? I think we would be interested to find out if there was somebody who had a records request that they didn't want to answer, and might have been kind of lobbying the board to make the change so they wouldn't have to release records. I would certainly be interested in seeing that, and I think the public would too.
So would I. So Patrick, let me turn to you next. The Lincoln Hills School is back in the news this week. Bring us up to date. What's going on there?
Sure. Lincoln Hills Schools is back in the news, and I think it'll stay there for another year. The Attorney General, Brad Schimmel, is heading the investigation. This is the secure facility for teenagers, young men, and young women in Irma, Wisconsin, north of Wausau. A number of issues are going on there that investigators believe amount to crimes. They're looking at destruction of public records, child sexual assault, child neglect, mistreatment of prisoners, suffocation, a whole host of crimes that they're looking at and have been
really
for a
awful
year.
Stuff.
So it's been going on for a year. Brad Schimmel, the Attorney General, says it could go on for another year. We learned recently that 16 employees have been put on administrative leave as part of this investigation is being done. The Department of Corrections won't release those people's names or their pay rates. People that they're on paid leave. They did release 2 names of employees who were put on administrative leave and then quickly resigned. But we've got 2 other employees who've been on leave for almost a year. We don't know how much that's cost taxpayers, and the Department of Corrections isn't telling us why they won't release at minimum their pay rates and their leave dates.
So what do you think is going on with the pay records there? The story, I think it was a day or 2 ago, said that, as you pointed out, that they're reluctant to release the records. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. We haven't gotten an answer to that. I had a chance to ask the governor that yesterday, why if his administration wouldn't release this record, why he thought that was okay. And he said he believed that it was because the Attorney General's office had told them not to release it. That turned out to not be the case, and the governor did back off a bit and say that he didn't know for sure. But the Attorney General says they've never told them not to release these types of records. There are a number of other things we're looking for. Obviously, we're looking for video of certain events. We're looking for conduct reports, incident reports. So far, our requests have been denied because this investigation is ongoing. For the moment, the Department of Corrections seems to be using the investigation as a reason for withholding absolutely everything we ask for. We're hoping that more will become available as this investigation continues.
Well, let's turn to another story this week. There was an incident on the floor in the State Assembly involving Peter Barca and Representative Bob Gannon of Slinger, Republican, Barca, the Assembly Minority Leader. Talk about what happened there and the reaction to it since.
Sure, it was an interesting day on the floor of the Assembly. It started with Representative Mandela Barnes from Milwaukee got up to criticize a press release that Gannon had put out a week earlier regarding he called Milwaukee an anchor on the state's economy and said that African American neighborhoods suffer the worst crime, and until we fix that problem, businesses would be unlikely to invest there. And Barnes and many other Democrats were very bothered by the framing of the debate that he had put forward. And so Barnes asked him for an apology for that statement. Gannon got up, defended it, said that he wouldn't apologize for it, and explained his reasoning for putting out that press release. And then as other Democrats got up to criticize him, including Peter Barca, the minority leader, and shortly after he started speaking, Gannon flipped the bird at him. And that caused quite a bit of consternation among the Democrats.
Is that a first on the floor of the State Assembly, as far as you know?
Oh, boy, I don't know if that's the first. There have been, it's got a long storied tradition.
I guess he didn't.
The state, I'm sure there, at some point, one senator shot another senator when we were a territory.
So I guess he wasn't.
I don't think
saying,
it's the worst behavior that's ever happened.
There were some Act 10
It's the most significant,
debates.
Sort of decorum problem we've had in recent years.
And I guess he wasn't saying.
Act 10 was pretty. Tempers flared. At one point, somebody said that, they were going to. That another legislator would wind up dead, and they're swearing quite a bit.
Right.
And throwing in drinks and things like that.
So Gannon's way of framing the press release he put out, and clearly the behavior on the floor drew the criticism of his own leadership. But is there something to this idea that crime in some of our neighborhoods affect economic development, Mary?
I would say yes, certainly crime affects economic development, and it certainly affects businesses moving into neighborhoods. However, I would say making a sweeping generalization about all of Milwaukee and that somehow Milwaukee is an anchor on the state's economy is one, a bit misleading, because Milwaukee is a huge economic driver and there's a lot of tourism dollars that flow in because of Milwaukee, and businesses come here, and you know, there are some very booming businesses. Harley-Davidson certainly is not an anchor on the state's economy.
Right. Still a whole lot of jobs in the city.
Right, and I think, you know, I think he was upset about Republicans getting criticism for the state's jobs numbers and Walker getting criticism for the state's job numbers, and was trying to say that Democrats should take some of the responsibility. But the idea that somehow crime in African American neighborhoods in Milwaukee is affecting all of the state's job numbers seems a bit of a stretch.
Yeah. Patrick, any further fallout from the Gannon episode as far as you can tell going forward, or is it all over?
Well, I mean, you know, obviously he upset Democrats, but he also lost a lot of his own members, many of whom may agree with some of his comments about the Milwaukee's economy. But by making that gesture, his colleagues were very frustrated with him. One of them, Jesse Kramer, immediately tweeted an apology to the state, saying that Gannon had shamed the assembly chambers. The speaker, Robin Voss, called all of the members in the middle of the floor session off to caucus for half an hour. That was closed to the press and the rest of the public. We don't know what was said there, but I'm sure that there was a stern talking about the issue and what had happened. So I think there's concerns that there's a ripple effect. That could hurt other Republicans. It just gives Democrats another talking point.
Okay. Well, let's turn to a couple of reader questions. Patrick, I want to start with you. One of our readers is asking about the Indian effigy mounds bill, which doesn't now appear to be going anywhere. But this reader's point was that he or she believes that the bill was essentially a way to play to the base of the Republican Party and didn't really have any real intent. What's your take on that, based on what you know?
Well, I don't know if it's a play to the base of the party. It's certainly a play to, concerns raised by certain industries. There's in the Madison area, there's a concrete ready mix place that's had a long ongoing fight over some burial site on their property. I think that's one of the major impetuses here. But the bill does look like it's not going anywhere. There's a very large protest led by the Ho-Chunk on Tuesday, and that same day the speaker said he did not see this bill being passed this session.
Another reader wants to know if, under the bill involving concealed carry, if the voucher schools would come under that bill. In other words, are they covered under the bill? Do you know the answer?
Yeah, my understanding is under current law, permit holders cannot take guns onto the school grounds of any school, whether public or private, voucher or charter, any type of school. And this bill would reverse that and say all school grounds they could go on. It would be up to local officials as to the building itself. So it would be, presumably the voucher school has a school board or some other governing body that would determine the school itself. Just like they would be treated the same as public schools.
Okay, Patrick and Mary, one final question to both of you. What are you looking at covering in the coming week? What's tops on your agenda? Mary, let me go to you first.
We've got the city elections coming up, so the primary is about a month away, and some mayoral races going on, or some mayoral candidates, some aldermanic races going on, so we'll be following that, obviously following up with the Public Records Board and whatever else surprises us.
You never know. Patrick, how about you?
Well, Mary makes a good point about the upcoming election. There's a three-way race for state Supreme Court. That primary will also be decided on February 5. We'll be taking a look at that race. The legislative session is in full swing because they're trying to get so much done, and hard to say which bills we'll be focusing on. For instance, this gun bill that we were talking about today just came out yesterday, so it's hard to say what more will surface in the coming weeks. And Lincoln Hills is something we'll continue to be taking a hard look at and find out what's going on up there.
Okay, very good. Well, that's why they call it news. Patrick Marley from Madison, of our Madison Bureau, thanks for being with us. Also want to thank Craig Gilbert from our Washington Bureau and Mary Spicuzza, Journal Sentinel reporters here in studio. And thanks to all of you for watching our On Politics show. I'm David Haynes.